Power BI is like an iceberg. Most of us look at the tip of the iceberg where all our beautiful reports, dashboards and KPIs lie. But underneath this iceberg is a whole jumble of jargon, technologies and concepts. So in this video, let me demystify all of these using a practical and real world example. Let's go. My name is Chandoo. I have been a Power BI trainer, consultant and learner for the last 8+ years. So I have used Power BI a lot with my clients and students, and this is what I understand. Power BI has this attractive tip of the iceberg where most of the reports and everything lie, and that kind of lures people in. But once you are using the technology, you realize that there is way more complications going on. So to make us understand Power BI, I thought using a mind map technique would work very best. So imagine Power BI is at the center of this mind map. We could think of the main ingredients of Power BI as these 5 or 6 tentacles. So we have got this data, all the things that are related to the data go in here. So if Power BI is an iceberg, data would be the bottommost layer of the Power BI thing. It is the most widest and farthest reaching aspect of Power BI, but also it is the least visible one. Then we have got platform or service, and we also have a reporting area. This is usually what we and our audience see. All the reports and graphs and visuals and everything that you're building go in here. Apart from these 3 main tentacles, there are some smaller ones here. For example, we have got a general data stuff. We have a power tools area. We also now have an increasingly growing and prominent AI area, and of course the cloud aspect of it. So to understand Power BI, let's kind of deep dive into each of these areas and get to know most of the jargon, technical concepts and sub-concepts. But before we go into these individual areas, let me first set the context. Imagine you are the data analyst or chief data analyst at a chocolate company called Awesome Chocolates. And your job is to use Power BI to build a reporting platform for your organization. So from here onwards, we are going to use Awesome Chocolates as a made-up example to kind of understand what these individual areas mean, what are various individual terms and concepts mean. Let's start our journey at the first layer, or the most important layer of Power BI, the data layer. Within the data, there are 2 main areas. One is getting the data and preparing the data. So I'll just call this as getting data. And then another one is calculating stuff on top of data. Even though they appear like separate things, many times in implementation there is a lot of overlap between getting the data and calculating things. So I thought it will be easier if we structure everything, all the technologies, jargon and words in one area like this. So let's first understand the key players or key concepts here. Within getting data, we have got Power Query, and Power Query is a software or a technology that we use to get the data from anywhere within your organization or outside the organization. So for example, using our Awesome Chocolates scenario, if you want to understand the wholesale prices of cocoa across the world, you can use Power Query to connect to a website where such prices are published on weekly or daily basis and get the data. Likewise, you could also use Power Query to connect to your CRM system that is internal to your organization and get the customer data regularly or once in a while. Next up, OneLake. OneLake is a newer technology added into Power BI and Fabric. I'll explain what Fabric is in a minute. And what this is basically a consolidated place for keeping all your organizational data. It is kind of like a layer of data or a lake of data where everything is sitting in separate databases, warehouses and other kinds of things where usually you maintain the data. So that's what OneLake is. Even though it kind of sounds fancy, it's basically a glorified data lake that caters to mainly Power BI and other Fabric related stuff. Other places from which you might get data for your organization include warehouses. These are usually large data sources where data is optimized for a business intelligence or reporting platform like Power BI. Databases, these could be your traditional databases like SQL Server or cloud databases like Azure or AWS. Then there is also a concept of Datamart. Think of Datamart as another kind of database slash warehouse or even a lake. Many times what happens is, if you want to, for example, build a reporting solution for your awesome chocolates finance department, you may not be able to get everything in one place and set up a separate place for that data because of various IT limitations or regulations in the organization. So that's when you would create kind of like a data mart inside Power BI and then use it. So even though all of these words sound different, they're all essentially places where data stays, and each offers different kind of levels of complexity, size of data sets, and what it can do with the data. There is also another word that you hear within Power BI, and this is Dataverse. What Dataverse is, essentially it's also another kind of place where data can stay. So when we are talking about Power Query can connect to all of these things, but it can also connect to other kinds of data sets. So for example, many times you may have this data sitting in one of these places, but also you might have an Excel spreadsheet or a web page or a bunch of PDFs that contain the data. So Power Query can connect to all of them. So Power Query, think of that as having connections to all of these things, but also other stuff like XLS, CSV, PDF, even SharePoint, pretty much anything really. So this is why when we talk about Power BI and understanding the key data technologies of it, Power Query is the first thing that you need to understand. Now let's go a little bit deeper into what we can do within Power Query. I've got more videos that explain the concepts as well as practical examples of Power Query on my channel, so feel free to check them out, but here I'll just give you some of the key terminologies that you hear within the world of Power Query. So within Power Query, we're going to expand that here. We've got transformations. Not that kind of transformers, but what these transformations do is they change the data from one way to another. A simple example is, let's say we have got our chocolate data, the chocolate sales data coming in from our shipment partners, and the data contains how many boxes of chocolate we are shipping in shipment terms. But we don't want the shipment terms, we want to use it in numbers or something else. We could use transformations to convert the data. Likewise, you could use Power Query transformations to, for example, split a name column into first name and last name, or convert the salary values into salary buckets like 50,000 to 100,000, more than 100,000, like that. So all of those are transformations. Essentially, you're changing the nature, shape, or kind of data from one to another. Another word that you also hear is the refresh. Refresh simply means updating the data. You could do that refresh inside Power Query, or you could also do it from the platform itself. I'll explain that later. Another word that you hear is the M language. This is the official coding language of the Power Query. Normally, as a data analyst or as a user of Power BI, you don't have to learn or use M language. Power Query is a visual software, so everything is kind of like click and drag. But sometimes if you want to achieve something advanced or complex, then you could use the M language to build some code into Power Query. The final words that you hear within the world of Power Query are SQL and query folding.
This is harder than you said it would be. Fold the corners. No, fold the corners.
Whoa, not that kind of folding. SQL is the language that most of the databases, data sources speak. So normally when you connect to a database through Power Query, you could also use SQL to query the database and get the data that you want. And query folding is a concept that Power Query uses to optimize your connections and your data getting process. For example, let's say you have got some chocolate sales data sitting in a SQL server in the organization, and you use Power Query to connect to that. Once the data is in Power Query, you realize that this was bringing data from 2019 up until 2024, and you didn't need all of that data. You only wanted the last 6 months data. So you have applied a transformation. This kind of a transformation is called filtering inside Power Query to filter the data down to last 6 months. Once you are ready to hit the publish and kind of make this data part of your calculation steps, Power Query sees that, oh, you are filtering the data against SQL Server. Let me do query folding, which means it will update the SQL query and change your filter condition into appropriate SQL code. In this case, it would pretty much write a where clause and move this calculation process inside the SQL server. So that's called query folding. This is an automatic optimization that happens inside Power Query to kind of keep things faster and better for your data processes. There are also many other general data terms that are used in the world of Power BI. I'll talk more about them later on in the general section. You might be thinking, that is a lot of technical things. How do you remember it all? And that's where the sponsor of the day, Notion, comes into picture. I have been using Notion to track and understand various technical concepts better, kind of like a second brain. And recently, Notion became even more powerful with the launch of their AI assistant feature. So today, let me show you how I use this AI assistant to help me learn and understand things better. Let's go. So let's say I'm learning about the row level security feature of Power BI. I normally go to various resources. One of them is the learn.microsoft.com. And on this page, I can see that there is a lot of information. So normally what I do is either get this information as a PDF. You can kind of print and get the PDF and put that into my Notion notes here. But I don't really want to go through everything. So what I'll do is here I press space and invoke the AI assistant, and from here I can just ask it to kind of summarize the RLS for me. And here it has given me a few bullet points explaining what RLS can do. For example, enables you to control access to the data of row level in dataset fields, etc., etc. And I can have follow-up discussions with it. I can also embed these bullet points right here in my notes so that I can refer to them later on. For example, I may want to know how to use DAX to implement RLS. And here it's going to come up with some really beautiful but straightforward examples of how to use RLS along with the DAX to implement various kinds of security constraints. So for example, simple filter for a sales team or manager team access to multiple regions, etc. You can also, once I know these things, another trick that I normally do is I'll ask it to quiz me on these concepts. And here is the quiz Notion AI has prepared for me. Please sign up for Notion AI using the link in the video description. Thank you, Notion, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into the calculation part. In the calculation, the first word that you hear is modeling.
Your hands.
What about them?
They're quite exquisite. Have you ever done any hand modeling?
Hand modeling?
Again, not that kind of modeling. This modeling, or also called as semantic modeling, is where you take all the data that you're getting. For example, you might have data about customers, shipments, products, locations, and refunds and everything, and then connect them all through a network diagram. So that's that step is loosely referred to as semantic modeling. There is more that goes into it, but at a high level, semantic modeling or data modeling or simply modeling really means given all your data items, so you might have different data items, you basically connect them to create a complex picture of the data. So that's semantic modeling. Then the next word that you hear is measures. Think of measures as calculations on top of the data. So let's say I have got all my chocolate shipments neatly arranged in a table. Then a measure would be, for example, a measure of total shipments would add up a column that has the shipment number and then give you the total value. Other words for measures are KPIs, key performance indicators, metrics, or even loosely calculations. Normally in a data process, you have got all the data, but you don't care about the data. You don't want to see a printout of all the 7 million shipments we are doing. As a business intelligence analyst or as an executive of the company, all you care about is what was the total shipments in the last 6 months, what percentage we have improved or decreased in our shipments compared to last year, who is our best salesperson. So those are the kinds of questions that you're asking. And to get those answers, we use measures to calculate things on top of the data. And once the measures are in place, you could then use those measures in a reporting layer to see the outputs. The other words that you also hear are tables. Tables are basically where your data stays. So if you have got shipments data, that goes into one table, customer data that goes into another table, product data that goes into another table. Star schema, this is a kind of a model, so in a way a kind of semantic model or a data model, where you create a data model setup that kind of looks like a star. How does a star look like? It has a central concept and all of these outer layers. Let me blow up the star schema here in this page. For example, in our Awesome Chocolates company, we do a lot of shipments. We ship chocolates. We send joy all over the world. And these shipments are containing information about how many boxes of chocolate, of what product, and who is buying them, where it is going, on what date, etc. But if I want to know more about the product, like what kind of a chocolate it is and what was the box weight and what is the SKU size, etc., I can have that data maintained in a separate table called products. Now this and that are related to each other, so we can connect them. This is what is happening in the semantic modeling or data modeling step. And likewise, you might also have tables that talk about customers, the shipment partners, and locations where we are sending this stuff and other things. So this is what a star schema looks like, because it has got a central concept of shipments which is connected to all of these outer layers. An extension of star schema is what we call as a snowflake schema. This is where some of these outer concepts might themselves be stars. So for example, on the products table, I might have a sub table that explains about the discounts that we are running, categories, who are the managers of these products, etc. So then we now have, from a star, gotten into a snowflake. So they're kind of closely related. If you squint your eye hard, a snowflake looks like a star. The next word that you might hear about this is relationships.
Relationships? We don't need no stinking relationships.
No, Michael, we need them. Relationship is nothing but the linkage between one table to another. So going back to our star schema example here, this is one table, that is one table, and that line is the relationship. That tells me that this particular column of shipments table, the product ID column, is connected to the product ID column here in the products table. The next word that you hear in the calculation world is the DAX. DAX is the language, it stands for data analysis expressions, that is used for building all of these measures that we talked about earlier. So we use DAX to create them, and within the DAX, another jargon word that you are now recently hearing is the DAX query view. This is a software that is baked into Powerbi that lets you test your DAX queries or DAX calculations and see the outputs before you implement them into your semantic model. So one way of thinking about the semantic modeling is, it's not just the tables and their connections, but it also encompasses the measures that you have calculated in your model. So all of them together, the tables, the relationships, the measures, the behavior of the measures, and the display nature of them, all of them together is called semantic modeling. And usually in a data process, if you're implementing a Power BI project, these are the first two things that we do. We get the data, we prep it, and we calculate them. So this whole of this process can be summarized with these jargon words. There is more of them there, but these are the main and most important ones. Now let's go to the next one. The next main area of Power BI is the reporting aspect. And the key things that you hear within the reporting world are visuals. These are all the individual charts, graphs, maps, whatever you are creating in a Power BI thing, they're all visuals. So for example, a column chart is a visual. Likewise, a line chart, a pie chart, all of these are different kinds of visuals. Then you have got a report. Report is nothing but collection of visuals set up into multiple pages. And then we have got a dashboard. Normally people use these words synonymously, but within the context of Power BI, a dashboard is kind of different. It can have one visual from one report and another visual from another report. So that's what a dashboard would be. Whereas traditionally we think of a dashboard as kind of like a report where all the things are collected together. So Power BI changed the nature of these words, but it doesn't really matter. You could kind of use them synonymously if you want. The next word that you may want to understand is the filters. Filter is a kind of criteria applied on top of either a visual report or a dashboard. So for example, let's say you have made a chocolate shipment dashboard or a chocolate shipment report. And while you are presenting, your boss might say, oh, this looks good. Can I see this only for our India geography? Then you would apply a filter on the geography and restrict the data only to India. Then all the visuals and everything will update, and that's pretty much what a filter is. Another word for filter is slicer, because you're slicing the data to look at how things look if you're only looking at India or if you're only looking at chocolate bars category or certain type of customers. Another way for filtering the data is drill through. So even though this might appear like a very technical word, essentially what a drill through is, it's kind of like a filter on a report or a page. So for example, you might have a report with 2 pages. This is my business overview. I'm going to call this as BOV. And then I have a geo page. This is where I'm explaining what is happening at a specific geography. So while looking at a business overview, I might have a pie chart that tells me how the things are happening for each geography. And I can use that pie chart and then select the slice that corresponds to India or Canada, and then I can say drill through to geography page and then show me the Canada detail here in more information. So that's what a drill through is. Even though the concept is called drill through, it's essentially as if you're filtering or slicing this page on Canada. Another concept that we hear in the world of reporting is paginated reports. A paginated report is kind of like a printout or a detailed report that explains things at a row level but used in Power BI. So for example, I have prepared a Power BI report that my customers can see, and when I send this report to the customer might say, this is only giving me an overview of the business that we are doing with that, but I want to see all the shipments line by line, all the shipments, all the 700 shipments that you have made to us in the last 6 months. That is when we use a paginated report. A paginated report is basically like a detailed report, usually with a scroll bar or something that kind of explains the individual line items. And you use a special software to create that. This is called paginated report builder, and you build that report there and then you connect that to Power BI so that you can see that as a visual inside the report. The final concept that we hear in the world of reporting is interactions. An interaction is where when you click on a certain aspect of one visual, other visuals update. So for example, I have got a column chart, a line chart, and a pie chart in a page, and I click on this column that corresponds to chocolate bars. As soon as I click, Power BI updates this line to show me what is that line only for chocolate bars. So it might have a different line there. Likewise, it will update this pie chart to show the corresponding portion of the chocolate bars in this pie. So that behavior is called interaction, because this is interacting with those other things. Even though it appears like a separate concept, this is also like filtering. Essentially, you are clicking this, so these two are filtered to show me what that is like. There are many other sub-concepts in the world of reporting, but I have got other videos where we go much more in depth with actual examples of Power BI screen. So do refer to my Power BI playlist that shows up on the screen somewhere to learn more about the reporting side of things. Now let's go to the next one. Okay, let's take a pause here. This video is getting too long, so I've decided to chop it into two parts. The second part will pick up where we left off and introduce us the rest of the jargon and keywords. So stay tuned for that. I have already created everything and I will upload the second part tomorrow. So you can either subscribe to my channel or you can just come back tomorrow and that video will be there. I'll catch you there. Bye. You can go now. Bye.